go live. We'll just do it. All right, I think we're good. It's Tuesday, September 28th, 2021. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
What happened?
I forgot to push. I had to push the record button.
And this is GeekNights. Tonight we are talking about gaming magazines. You know, like Nintendo Power and Biz. All right, go ahead with your opening bit whenever you are ready.
So, astute, the listener who may be watching and not just listening, astute watcher may notice I'm not wearing the headphones that I've worn for at least a year and change.
Oh yeah, I didn't even ask. I just assumed.
So I've had this pair of Bose QC35-2 headphones for a long time. They've just been in an office unused for almost 2 years.
Right. You went into your office to get all your crap.
Yeah, so I went to my office to get all my crap, which we talked about on a previous episode. And so these headphones were among my crap, and I went to use them, and I was like, oh yeah, these are actually like the best. Why did I not go get these earlier? I could have been using these the whole time.
Yeah, see, it's funny because at home, like I'm wearing my Sony like studio monitor headphones, the closed ones. I have just the exact same headphones. I have 2 pair of them, one at home and one at work.
Well, I had, the AKG ones that I've been using at home, right, were open.
So I actually have a closed and an open plugged into my computer at all times, and I use whichever one based on, like, if I'm playing a game or working, and I want, like, I can just talk to Emily or hear things, so I wear the open ones. But recording GeekNights or mastering audio, I wear the closed ones, or like listening to music.
I had those because I'd never had to use them in a situation before, right? I didn't have to A, wear them all day, B, wear them right while there were noises. I was wearing them like alone in an apartment, for music or game audio. That was it. Those are the only audio that came out of my home computer. But now, if I'm working at this computer all day, I got Spotify going while I'm working. I got noises coming from open the window because the weather is open window weather now.
Oh, yeah. And as an aside, that stop work order at our building is over, and they're drilling on the wall again.
Okay. But yeah, we used to always make fun of Bose because Bose was, I guess, in his origin, sort of this audiophile brand.
Like overrated. Like they weren't bad. They were just way overrated.
Overpriced and overrated, and still a bit overpriced.
The worst thing is nerds would always be like, audio people would always be like, no highs, no lows, must be Bose. One of those like, fix it again, Tony.
Are like above Bose. They got to go to somewhere other nonsense, right?
Oh, I work with someone who's one of those audiophiles, and good Lord, did he spend like thousands of dollars on preamps,
on a power cable?
Yeah.
But Bose is always like, get normal people who will have money to buy a more expensive thing with that, sort of like a luxury brand in a way.
Yep.
But I'm sure some Bose products, I don't know their whole product line, are probably still bullshit like that. But the quiet comfort noise canceling headphones are legit. They actually have newer ones now. This is 35 2.0. They have 45 now, which is like a few dollars, like tens of dollars more than these, and is slightly different, I guess.
See, for closed, I really like monitors. Sony above and beyond. I prefer the closed without noise cancellation, no matter how loud my environment is.
Have you had the noise cancellation?
Yeah, I find it doesn't matter that much compared to a truly closed, like isolating headphone.
These are truly closed if I turn the noise cancellation off, and it makes an enormous difference.
With these, I literally can't hear anything, like at all. Like Emily will yell or something. I literally can't hear a thing when these things are on.
I mean, I can't hear, I can hear nothing when they're on, and I can hear even less when the noise cancellation is on.
I can hear everything through my Sennheisers.
Yeah, but anyway, it does make a huge difference, throughout the day, right? In terms of like just, distracting noises and whatnot being heard and such. And usually, for example, right now, podcasting, right, I would usually have to turn Rim up because Discord is quiet for some reason.
I mean, some reason. I can explain why if any nerds care. I'll do that in the stinger. I'll explain why.
Anyway. So yeah, if you have a pile of money, I do recommend this one Bose product and no others. And speaking of getting the shit from the office, last episode I did offer up my keyboard as a second dibs, my office keyboard. A listener purchased it. I sent it to them. They received it today, and they are very happy with it. So that's 2 for 2 on the second dibs. We sold a monitor and a keyboard. I'll find something else to sell soon because I definitely have some more crap.
Well, I actually have a second dibs when we get to that part of the show, but it's not time for that. It's time for news. You can't use that here. So there's a ton of gaming news. I think we even skipped a Tuesday show at some point, so we're not going to cover
a ton of gaming news. When is there not?
But there was like more than usual between the Nintendo Direct, a bunch of old stuff we didn't even talk about, and the Blizzard story just continuing to get bigger and bigger.
Happened. A PAX happened. A
PAX happened. We weren't at.
Game Devs of Color Expo happened.
Yep. There's so much going on. So a few things we'll talk about. One, there is some big news on the financial side of tabletop gaming. If you don't know, AsmoDee, the company that basically is the second largest maker of board games in the world. Mm-hmm. I want to say Hasbro is technically the biggest
publisher. I don't know if maker.
Well, they sell most of the articles. So much like way back when we were talking about how complicated and like difficult to summarize the relationships between publishers, producers, like development studios in the video game industry is, tabletop is getting just as complicated. So most of the articles refer to them as a maker rather than get into that can of worms. But
anyway.
They're basically the big ones. They are responsible for ultimately and own the IP for like most of the tabletop games you probably know about that aren't kid games.
So what happened was way back, was it few years ago? I don't even know how long ago.
I feel like we even talked about it on GeekNights.
We did. They were already kind of a big board game publisher over in Europe. And I forget what the exact order of events, but they were acquired by some sort of private equity firm.
PAI Partners, one of the bigger like private equity firms in the world. They're a big deal, and they seem to. Well, I will not give any judgment on the quality of their purchases because I'm not a financial advisor. But anyway,
the AsmoDay started acquiring other board game companies.
Fantasy Flight, Atomic Mass,
notably Fantasy Flight, but also others as well.
Z-Man, Catan Studios, Days of Wonder.
Yep. So they brought all of these big time board game places under one roof. So, you think you're a private equity firm, you're either going to do some Toys R Us type scamming, but that's not what's going on here. Instead, you bought this thing. Your goal is to make it more valuable than it was when you bought it and then sell it. Right. So they bought AsmoDay, and there are two main methods they did to increase the value of the company. Number one,
we know of as outsiders.
Sure. They acquired these other board game companies and merged them. Now, 1 + 1 normally equals 2, but if you get enough big companies together, 1 + 1 can equal 3 because when there's less competition, right, and you have more control over the market, a bigger market share, suddenly you have more power in the market, and even though you only had 1 + 1, the value of the thing, of yourself goes up, right?
Yep.
And the second thing they did was cut, right? Laid people off. Got rid of redundancies, got rid of, things that weren't selling well. If you could just look at Fantasy Flight alone, you can see how much stuff they cut away from that company and got rid of and only kept the business lines that were profitable, like the Star Wars stuff, much, right?
A lot of, in games, especially in tabletop for a long time, a lot of smaller studios. You saw this in the anime industry too, in America. The people who ran the companies, for a lot of reasons, would use profitable things to prop up underperforming things for a lot of different reasons. And private equity generally just says, just drop the underperforming things entirely.
Right. If it doesn't make, okay, sure, that thing made money, but it didn't make enough money, so let's get rid of it, right?
Yep. Or that thing makes a lot of money, but it takes up all the time of our best development team. Let's cancel that whole thing and have this development team work on this other intellectual property that we acquired in this other company and work with those artists and make something that'll sell way more.
Regardless, they successfully increased the value of AsmoDay significantly. And now they're attempting to sell it they bought it for
1.2 billion euros in 2018.
And now they're selling it they're asking 2 billion. So they basically made $800 million if they successfully sell.
Yep. Never mind any profits they gain depending on the relationship. Like, I'm not too deep in exactly how their relationship worked, but any profits they would have taken along the way as well, like revenue or anything.
So we'll see if it sells and to whom for how much, and that will have a significant impact on the future of board gaming worldwide.
Yep, and I think your two takeaways are, one, a lot of nerds really, really misunderstood this news and think that Goldman Sachs is buying Asmodee. That is not what's happening. I saw, do you know how many tweets or like full-on news articles on bullshitty blogs said Goldman Sachs buying games gonna ruin them? Like,
managing the transaction.
I understand that you're mad about capitalism, but that is so far from what's happening here.
If that would actually be amazing if it happened. I could go work for Goldman Sachs,
right?
Making board games.
Right. But speaking of making a fortune, the other thing this actually is really, really like the real news here is that board gaming is fucking huge globally. And the fact that these kinds of sales are happening mean that capital, like the people who have capital, believe that it is still an underserved and untapped market, that we've only scratched the surface.
Yeah, part of that value increase was definitely just the growth of the pie, right?
Yeah.
Board games as an industry got bigger, therefore board game companies got bigger.
And it's very telling that it's private equity involved in this and not public companies or like Hasbro or something. Like Hasbro probably couldn't even afford to buy Asmodee. There's a lot. It gets real complicated with public companies. Real complicated.
Yeah, Hasbro, I think, has $2 billion somewhere. Right?
Oh, yeah. But basically what I'm getting at is that
could afford 100 AsmoDays with just the cash they have.
In general, private equity is often maligned unfairly, though to be fair, private equity can suck shit. But because capitalism is terrible. But the difference between a public company and a private company at this scale is not what you think it is. In general, private companies can take way bigger risks, can do a lot more aggressive stuff without having to be beholden to anyone who's holding them accountable. Because if a private equity-backed company goes under, the people who backed it just lose everything. Like, they're just done. And they know that risk, and that happens all the time. Public companies have a very powerful fiduciary duty to their shareholders. That's why you see things like in our next news of shareholders suing a company if they believe that company didn't maximize profits. Private equity can kind of do whatever it wants. But
sort of, yeah. I mean, like, if you invest in a private company, if you're on the board of the, private equity firm, you might be able to choose the CEO of the company, right?
Yep.
But it doesn't have to listen to you that much. You could change the CEO, I guess.
Or a private company could donate all its profits to charity. If a public company just did that, the shareholders could sue over it. So generally, what this means is that people who invest in public companies, like rich people with capital, those are generally safer investments that are more regulated, more scrutinized, and there's more public information. Private equity goes after things that are either very risky or things that people who have money and inside knowledge think are way undervalued by the rest of the stock market. I'm generalizing a lot here, and this is not investment advice, but my read on this is that board gaming has only scratched the barest tip of the surface of the real market. Like, I think we're
also, given the other things going on in board game world, right? Shipping and production and supply chain issues. We'll see, right?
Yep. So, we will see, and I think we'll save that for another show. In some other news...
If that destroys many smaller board game companies, suddenly the big ones get even bigger.
That makes Hasbro and Asmodee ever more powerful.
Because a bigger boat is easier to weather a storm with.
Yep. Also, a bigger boat has too many people who cannot afford to let it sink.
Yep.
So, in some other news, the Nintendo Direct happened. There was a ton of news. If you want a play-by-play of everything they announced, go to a site that'll give you that. Like, we're just going to talk about the ones that we're interested in. Offhand,
the big one that no one knew was coming, that's big for us, is that ActRaiser remake that came out. So,
yep. Now, ActRaiser...
If the listener ever heard of ActRaiser.
They had to. If you listen to GeekNights, I feel like I don't think we've talked about ActRaiser except in, 2007.
So ActRaiser is a Super Nintendo game that's truly unique, not entirely unique, but very unique in that incredible soundtrack, A+ soundtrack. B, it's 2 games in one. There's a town game and there's a side-scrolling, normal kind of action guy with a sword game, sort of like Strider a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of.
That juxtaposition was so crazy to kids when it came out. It was like one of the earliest widely known genre-destroying games.
Yeah, and the town part affected the action-y part, right?
Yeah, you do the town part, you level up your shit, you go to the action-y part, you find an item, you go back and use that to help the town part.
Right. So the problem was ActRaiser 2 came out because ActRaiser 1 was a hit, and ActRaiser 2 was just the action-y part and was sad. The town part.
We even did a panel on this. It's one of the few Lost Geek Nights panels. If someone in the audience recorded a panel from like PAX West 2010 called "Egregiously Unrealized Potential," holy shit, get me that video. I will pay you. But we only ever did that panel once, and almost everything we talked about except I think the Pokemon MMO is the only thing we talked about that has not come true. And we talked a lot about ActRaiser.
Forgotten Masters was the one that no one.
No, Steal from the Forgotten Masters also had some of that, but we talked about like Sopwith and stuff in that panel. This one is where we were like, Bionic Commando, the remake of the NES game, did better than the game they made it to promote. ActRaiser 2 failed compared to ActRaiser 1.
An HD remake of ActRaiser. If you've never played ActRaiser in your whole life, find a Super Nintendo ROM or buy this thing. Interesting notes. The music in ActRaiser was made by the guy who made the Streets of Rage music.
Also right? A+ game music.
And he said on Twitter, he's like, hey, I made some extra tracks for this remake. And what he did was he made the tracks the old Super Nintendo way, right? Because you can play the remake in old school mode or current mode.
Quote, it features an upgrade to Yuzo Koshiro's soundtrack by Koshiro himself, but you can stick to the original score if you like.
Right, but he made it because most of the tracks were already scored for a Super Nintendo in the 90s, and then were sort of HD remade, right? But he added new songs. So in order to keep everything on the level, he composed those new songs in their old school Super Nintendo way first, and then HD remade those.
That's amazing.
Right? Yeah.
So
even though it's the year 2021.
If you've never played this game, I honestly recommend playing the remake. I just assume it'll be fine. But
I'm disappointed that they just didn't make ActRaiser 3.
Yeah, because the problem...
Maybe that's coming. Who knows?
I think it could come, because the problem with ActRaiser was that the mashup and the music was really all it had going for itself. Because honestly, just from a pure game design perspective, the town part is simplistic to the point of being insulting. And
fun.
It was, to a kid... that is ultimate fun. If you play it today,
the town part.
But if you play it today,
it's like baby's first populist.
Yeah, but if you play it today, like you'll look at it and you'll be like, "So I just wait." You basically just wait.
Yeah.
And the platforming part was only okay. It was not bad, but it was like a mediocre to average platformer for its era.
It was just a platforming hit guys with sword thing. That wasn't anything special about it.
Yep. You had pretty limited movement, and it was difficult, like very difficult, especially in the later levels for kids. But
I'd rather play something like Demon Sword for NES.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of 2D platformers from that era that are just better.
Ninja Gaiden is better than ActRaiser,
Yeah. ActRaiser, you know what it felt like? It felt like a lot of parts of Faxanadu, if anyone remembers that.
I'd rather play Faxanadu than just the action part of ActRaiser.
I feel like it's a close race. I'd have to play them both again.
It is pretty close. Anyway.
Yeah, because the thing I can't speak to about Faxanadu is how NES annoying is it? I have not played it since I had an NES.
A little bit, but not too much.
Yeah. So in some other Nintendo Direct news, it looks like the original console war is done to the point that there is now a SEGA Genesis Classics coming out on the Nintendo Switch.
Well, so the way this is working is that if you have Nintendo Online, which isn't free, but is inexpensive, it's like one annual fee of like $20. It's cheap, right?
Well, we did the family plan thing, so I'm just mooching off of you.
I think the family plan is worth it. I don't think the individual plan might be worth
Absolutely.
it.
I would not pay for it if I had to pay full freight.
It depends how much. If you're playing Nintendo Switch games online a lot, then it's probably worth it. But anyway. The way that works is if you have Nintendo Switch Online plan, then you get free access to NES, Super Nintendo, and Dreamcast. Right? So you can play and SNES games, and among other games like Tetris 99 and stuff like that, just on your Switch for free. As part of it, not for free, it's part of the thing, right? They're adding N64 games and Genesis games, which, is actually pretty. The N64 ones are significant because, emulating those is still easy, but a little bit different than emulating, an NES game, which is trivial, right?
There are significant.
It's not difficult like emulating a Saturn game.
Yep. But like the fidelity is not quite there for most of the emulators.
The fidelity's there, but
well, it's not quite there if you're like speedrunning or something. Let's say.
I don't know. It depends. But anyway, the point is, the N64 and Genesis games are coming to the Switch, but you need to pay more. You need to get a Switch Online Plus account. You need to pay more money to get those. It's like an upsell to the next level. Just kind of meh.
Well, the other interesting thing, there's going to be a retro controller, but
they already sell retro NES and SNES controllers that you can use with Bluetooth with your Switch. I have the NES one. It's exactly what you think it is. It's a Bluetooth NES controller, right? Mm-hmm. But they're going to sell Genesis ones and N64 ones that are Bluetooth wireless controllers to work with the Switch. And you can buy those if you have the account, right? It's like if you have the account, then you can just buy the controller. Otherwise, they won't sell you the controller. You could buy one from someone else. However, the Genesis controller they're selling is the original US 3-button controller. People in Japan are going to be able to buy a 6-button Genesis controller that will not be sold, as far as we know so far, in the US, which is bullshit because there are several Genesis games where that controller is basically mandatory, though many where it's not.
Yep. Well, their argument, they made a very clear statement that they're not going to go back on this. And what they said was, for the mass market in America, no one ever had a 6-button one. So why would? Yeah, only super nerds did. Most people didn't.
Absolutely needed it to play several games, like especially the fighting games like Street Fighter. It was like essential.
Yeah, well, it's essential if you care. It's not actually essential to make the game work.
Super Street Fighter 2 Tournament Edition was like one of the top Genesis games.
Oh, yeah, but I'm saying their argument is very few Americans were acquainted with the 6-button controller at the time the Genesis was available in stores.
Anyway, so that's just a sad thing. Any other major newses? I mean...
Yep, so the Blizzard saga is ongoing, and I do want to mention a few updates to that. So one, the state of California has actually weighed in, I think we talked about this a little bit before, accusing Blizzard of shredding evidence of abuse in the company. So there is a state-level, like, possibly criminal investigation going on as part of this.
Seems true.
Also, in this backdrop, the person in charge of Overwatch 2, kind of one of the biggest deal games they are working on, has quit Blizzard. You're just leaving. So,
a lot of people are quitting, or
a lot of people
resigning,
people are quitting
fired.
Blizzard left and right. It's not clear.
Really, everything, the worrying started when it became Activision Blizzard, right? That was the worrying started, but nothing bad happened immediately. Then there was that big layoff like a few years ago. And that's when it was like, that was
when most of the people I knew who were working at Blizzard at the time were gone.
Yeah, there was like a big layoff a few years ago. I think it was in news for sure. I remember it was a time when I was like playing Hearthstone a lot, and I was watching a Hearthstone streamer, and he had to just turn on his partner worked at Blizzard doing something I don't know, and he basically he got up. There was like to take a phone call. He came back and he was like, gotta go, because his partner was just laid off in the big layoff, right?
Yep. So
turned his stream off.
That
was when things started going downhill. And then you started to see big names at Blizzard leaving, right? The people who ran Hearthstone, right? They left to make a different company. And then you started to see the CEO, right? The historic Blizzard people, right? They bailed.
Yep.
And then the shit hit the fan, and now it's like, the curve was already downward trending. Now it's like a straight vertical line.
So
with poop at the bottom.
Shareholders have sued Blizzard. I think we already talked about that over the sexual harassment and such. The SEC is now investigating Blizzard over that same situation, not as part of that shareholder lawsuit per se, just in general. And there is some breaking news, it looks like, from today. Yeah, this just broke. It looks like Activision is now agreeing as part of a settlement, in a settlement for, I guess, the Federal Employment Agency lawsuit. There's so much stuff going on. I can't actually keep it all straight.
I can't even tell which. Basically, I see headlines that are like bad stuff at Blizzard, and I can't tell if it's a rerun, an update, or actually a new bad thing.
So the civil rights. So in the middle of all that, there was a civil rights lawsuit by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission against Blizzard. Today, it was announced that they are settling, and with $18 million, the company will now put into a fund to deal with and pay victims of harassment and assault within the company.
Yeah. Somebody tweeted, I don't know if this is true because they didn't cite any facts on this, and it doesn't sound true to me. They tweeted saying that, Call of Duty something Activision makes $5 million a day, which... hard to believe that.
I don't have their revenue numbers handy. I could look that up, but
yeah. But they're like, so they were like, the 18 million is nothing, and I'm like, that the 18 million is kind of nothing to a company that big.
But remember, that only deals with one tiny story in the sea of bad news around Blizzard.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's not like they got off the hook, right? They're still in the deep.
This
shit.
does not resolve any of those other situations that are going on.
Yeah. Also, I question $5 million a day on one game. Why would you have any other game?
But in other Blizzard news, I guess Diablo II, the remake, came out in the middle of all this, and I didn't actually
see. If you never played Diablo II, the original, just play the original. I mean, the remake is probably a little easier user interface-wise, but also don't give this company any fucking money.
Yeah. I do feel like there is a future where the end result of all this is a company with good game design and good people working in it, but I think it's going to...
Blizzard was before it was Blizzard Activision.
So several of these things predate the Activision merger, and several of these things were specific to Blizzard executives and early Blizzard people.
I'm not saying that the company wasn't horribly sexist and toxic with its internal culture when it was Blizzard. I'm saying is that before the Activision days, it was one of those companies that only produces, well-designed hit games every single time. You knew if it was a Blizzard game, it was going to be a big...
I think they still are accomplishing that. The people I know who do still work there talk about how that is still true. And
I think that to some degree, yes, but also they converted into making everything, microtransaction money.
Well, the problem there is that trend is happening everywhere, and it's going to continue to happen because the meta reality is that there's no way to make money with big games without that. Under modern capitalism, you're going to see that same creep everywhere. There's a reason I stopped playing Hearthstone.
They also have made some failing games like that MOBA, the crappy one.
So I feel like a good company can rise out of the ashes of this, but the word ashes is a load-bearing word in my sentence.
At the end of the day, no matter what happens, there will be a company that owns the rights to Diablo, StarCraft, Warcraft, etc. And that company has value, right? No matter what, because those brands are so valuable. But it may be a Chinese company. We'll see.
Yeah. All right. But anyway, things of the day. So it's just a little video. It's titled, "If this doesn't win the Spiel des Jahres next month, then that award means nothing." And all the video, you don't even need to understand anything that's happening in the video, read any text. But if you watch the video, you will see people playing a game. You will be able to intuit from the video, which is less than a minute long, what the rules are to this game. This game is amazing. I would love to see it played at a PAX or something, like an Omegathon. I'm not even joking. And this game involves cash money and mousetraps and blindfolds. And that's all I'm going to say.
I mean, they're joking if this doesn't win the Spiel des Jahres, but it's like a game that you can, A, just looking at it, you want to play it. B, you don't even need to be taught the rules. You can figure them out by looking at it.
Yep.
It's like a game that can do those two things is already No, you need a genius designer.
What do we
make a
say in
game
all our
design
panels
that
at
can
PAX?
accomplish those two things.
We talk so much about elegance. Nothing is more elegant than a game that Scott just described. You look at the board and you go, oh, I know exactly how this game works.
And you're right.
Yeah, that's the key. You're right. Games like
Look at
Scythe,
Monopoly and
you're
say, I know how
wrong.
this works and be wrong. You
Yep.
cannot look at this and
You
be wrong.
and I both looked at Scythe and had an idea about what that game was.
We were wrong.
Yeah.
All right. So another thing of the day. So a lot of computer sciencey people, they love to have these sort of programming competitions where you write programs that compete against each other at a game, right? It's like, hey, everyone write a chess bot. We'll have the chess bots have a chess tournament and we'll see which one wins, right? And then you're, I guess, the best AI programmer, right? So a lot of those projects back in the day used to be you would just program in a bunch of hard-coded heuristics, which could be very strong, and often are still the way to go.
I mean, watch me play Bomberman for real, and I follow some very simple flowchart rules that will often win me a game.
Nowadays, you might do some machine learning when your heuristics, can't get you over the last mile or whatever. So here, someone made a competition of basically programming Bomberman bots. It involves co-op and competitive, because sometimes you might have teams, and I don't even know what all the rules are because I didn't read them all. But it's a competition called Bomberland where you have to program a Bomberman bot, a program that will play Bomberman and compete against other programs playing Bomberman to attempt to win at Bomberman, and that is pretty good.
That is so fun.
Anyone entering this, yeah.
You know what I want to see? I want to see, like, 2 years from now at SGDQ where they show off, like, the ultimate AI that exists in this game somehow.
I don't know, but yeah, you can enter this thing. It's like, I think it's an ongoing kind of thing. It's not like a one-shot deal. So.
In the meta moment, the Kingdoms Booklet book is The Tale of Genji. I did not read this weekend, but I was reading for a while ahead of Scott, so I think we're still on track to finish in October.
It's weird because if you look at the Kindle report at the bottom, it says I'm like 30% done, right? But if you look at the chapter number, there's 50-something chapters, and I'm on chapter 20-something. So that feels like I'm halfway done.
Is it a Prince of Nothing situation where there's like 100 pages of glossary?
I don't know. Either A, there's big chapters coming up that are long, or B, there's some sort of post-credits shit that's taking up a pile of pages, making me think I'm not as far along as I am, or C, both.
Yep. But either way,
we'll
we are steamrolling along as Genji continues to sleepwalk through life, discarding women left and right in his pursuit of the little girl he's attracted to, that he wants to groom into his perfect wife to replace the woman who spurned him, kinda.
Creepy.
Man, Genji, you're kind of a shitbag.
Yeah. Any other meta things? We will not be at literally any convention, even if they might happen.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe us about, like, we've already not gone to conventions, but like we have hockey tickets that we paid for, and we're not going to the hockey game.
Yep.
It's like we're just losing money technically.
I mean, at least those were
fallacy, so we're not losing money. The money's already lost.
At least those were preseason games. That's
What are you gonna do in a few weeks when there's a real game? You gonna go?
Yeah, you know what? I haven't thought about that yet. I'm just compartmentalizing that, and I'm gonna think about it this weekend.
Oh, well, you better think fast.
Yep. But otherwise, our Discord's rocking. We're playing games. We're doing stuff. It's still warm outside enough to where we're still biking a lot, but we're working on some projects. I'm working on some panels that might just turn into online panels, not at any particular convention. We'll see.
I had an idea for a thing, and then I actually went to do the thing, and it turned out to be not as great an idea as I thought, so I didn't do it.
I still think it's a good idea, but you gotta wait until you see one of your sources and you're inspired. Like, you see it and you're like, that's the one.
I don't think it's gonna happen. Anyway.
Unless the problem is you're not gonna watch enough of that kind of content to find the one. Anyway, I mean, I'm still working on. I failed, and it looks like other people failed, to get Mega Team Fortress to work with Quake Online because the online multiplayer doesn't seem to work with it. But instead, it looks like I can get it to work locally, so I can at least get the footage, material, and analysis I need to do that other panel I was talking about.
You could also get it to work with the not remaster, right?
Oh, yeah, I could do it that way.
I think the only thing is every player would have to install the mod themselves identically.
Yep.
And then you would have to run the server, and then everyone would have to type in the IP address of the server.
Oh, I'd have to run it like completely old school, the way I would have before the Quake remaster even existed.
Yeah.
Which we'll see if I do that or if I just play the game locally and run around with a rocket and a stopwatch and analyze the video to figure out what I need to figure out.
Yeah, I went online and I downloaded just some maps, not mods, just maps, to get some more deathmatch variation, and they totally worked in the remaster.
But you didn't make that JSON file that you need to make them show up in the menu.
Even if you did that, it doesn't matter. The problem is that if I start a server and someone joins the server, they'll just be disconnected because they don't have the map. It won't automatically download the map to them from the server.
Yeah.
They would have to independently go and get the map and put it in the folder themselves in order to actually play multiplayer. So I could do that, and I could just give you a zip file to all my friends, and we could all install the same maps that I found on the internet. Or I could just give you the link, and you could install the same maps. But we couldn't get more players in easily because they would have to, right? And we couldn't communicate with them because they wouldn't get into the server unless we switched to a normal map.
Now I just look forward to Quake 2 getting the similar treatment because I am confident they will support the popular mods in Quake 2 because nobody would play Quake 2 online much unless they included Action Quake support and Lithium Deathmatch support.
There is no reason that any mod that is simply maps, and sounds, those sorts of things, right? And not anything that modifies the exe file should not just work.
Yep. So, that aside, we'll get right into it. Continuing our 2-week-long odyssey into magazines, we're talking about gaming magazines, which there's way too many to talk about, even all the ones we read. But
gaming magazines were the biggest deal, right? If you were a kid in the 90s, there was no internet, there was no other news source.
Like if you were a mega nerd, like the megaist of nerd, you could dial into a BBS that would have information about games, maybe.
But yeah, games were a big thing, especially video games, and there was no information source for video games that was widely available. There wasn't a TV show about video games, at least not one that had news regularly, right? There was like that one the game show where kids would run around collecting NES cartridges or Captain N.
Yep.
But those didn't give you video game news. You might see a few TV commercials for video games. You might see some ads for video games in like your comic book magazine,
ads in comic books and I almost said PC games, and ads on TV were how I found out about 90% of the video games I cared about as a kid.
You might find out about games just because someone else has them. You might go to Toys R Us and look at the wall of games and just see one that you never saw before.
Yep. Right? You might go to that local Blockbuster and rent every NES game one by one.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, to get information about video games, the only real way was magazines. That was it. Because no one's uncle actually worked at Nintendo unless you lived in Redmond, Washington.
Yep. Granted, every fucking kid you knew had an uncle who worked at Nintendo and told you a lot of secrets that were not real.
No, were not true. But then there was the Japanese kid whose family moved from, Japan for real, who in 4th grade, when everyone said, "What do you want for Christmas?" he said he wanted a Super Nintendo, and everyone was like, "That doesn't exist."
I have a similar story. It was
we thought he was making up his uncle working at Nintendo.
I think this was 1st grade. I might have been 2nd grade. I'm going based on remembering what the classroom looked like. But we had a guest who came in. She was the mother of a Japanese exchange student who was in the school. So she flew over to the U.S. and she came to our school. And she was just like answering questions of all these 1st graders about Japan. And then at the end, she was like, "Hey, tell me a word and I'll teach you how to write it in Japanese." And I raised my hand first. I was super excited. And I was like, "Famicom." And the teacher and all the kids were like, "What the fuck?" And she was like, "Famicom." And she was real excited about that. And we talked about the NES for a while.
Yeah. Anyway. So yeah, there was no way to get information about video games except magazines, and video games were a big deal.
Yeah, like so before we were born, like both of us, our families had Ataris and televisions, played video games.
Video games were a big deal in the 80s and 90s, and there were several magazines that sold large numbers of copies.
Now, to be clear, not just video games, because tabletop, Dungeons and Dragons, that was also big in the 70s.
And there was also no way to get news about those other than magazines.
Yep.
Mainstream, things that publish news about all sorts of topics, like newspapers or, more general magazines, didn't talk about that stuff. You had to get a specialized magazine, no other news source that was widely available. So
I guess we'll go in vague chronological order.
A lot of video game and game magazines in the 90s.
Not only that, when
2000s.
when one showed up, like that we were subscribed to, usually it was the fight with me and my brother of who got to read it first, followed by it being read and reread and reread for an entire month until the next one came out. I would spend a lot of time looking at screenshots of games I'd never played, imagining what they might be like. So just like last week, we'll go in vague chronological order. And the one the earliest one I remember was literally just called Electronic Games, and I mostly experienced
I know that one existed. I don't think I ever actually read it.
I experienced it by reading back issues that were like on coffee tables and like on shelves at relatives' houses. Like I think my uncle had them. This was talking about like Atari games and Intellivision games.
Yeah,
and
that one goes way back to like the Commodore, like the Apple PC type era, right?
Yeah, like this magazine started in 1981, like before I was even born. But
there was no NES.
But that was an era when I was too young to even seek out information, so I would just read. Like kids often don't have a sense of time in the pre-internet era, in that I would get a Bloom County comic or a Doonesbury comic or a Mad magazine from the 60s. Like Mad Magazine from the 60s was a big example, where as a kid, this is a funny thing I'm reading, and I have no like sense of place or time of where this artifact came from. So I'd be reading these old Electronic Games magazines, being really excited about like Atari 2600 or Commodore games that were already very old that I just didn't know about. But the one...
You didn't have a lot of information. So.
Yeah. But the one that like changed everything was Nintendo Power for me. That was... I remember so clearly, we were in a superstore in Michigan. I think it was a Myers, which was one of those like Walmart adjacent type places. And we were doing grocery shopping, and we harangued our parents into walking through the video game aisle. And we saw a magazine there called Nintendo Power. It was, in fact, the first issue of Nintendo Power. And we convinced our parents to buy it. It wasn't cheap compared to magazines at the time, and we basically convinced them to subscribe to it. We didn't actually get one delivered for like 2 more months, so we had to go back and buy the second issue, but starting with the third issue, it came. And Nintendo Power was my primary interface into the world of gaming pretty much up until like early high school, like late middle school.
So I didn't get Nintendo Power, not because I didn't enjoy it. Obviously, I bought a few, and my brother had a subscription, I guess, in the N64 days. He subscribed.
Wow, we unsubscribed in the N64 days.
Yeah. But yeah, the reason I didn't go for Nintendo Power is, I would read one now and again at a friend's house or whatever, and I'd be like, whoa, right? I'd enjoyed it greatly, but even my kid with brain was like, Nintendo makes this magazine. It's not independent. I can't be trusting this.
Right? See, I thought of it differently. I knew.
I did not subscribe to Nintendo Power.
I knew.
Its contents entertained me greatly.
I knew most Nintendo games were crap. I knew most video games were crap because I grew up with an Atari and a television before we even had an NES. But the Nintendo games that were good were so high quality, and I wasn't reading Nintendo Power to get news about games. I was reading it to learn about Nintendo games I didn't have access to figure out if they were worth buying, not based on the reviews. Games. I didn't read the words. When I think back to being a kid, I barely read
the words. Oh, I read all the words.
I read the words like after the fact. I'd mostly look at the images, look at like maps of games. Like I remember looking at the maps of levels of Strider to decide if Strider was worth buying at a garage sale because I saw someone was selling Strider
in the magazines I bought.
I'd go back and read all the words like later, but mostly I was reading Nintendo Power not to get news. I was reading Nintendo Power because every issue had at least one article that gave some insight into like the Japanese side of Nintendo, or like a name of someone like Miyamoto would like be mentioned, or like something about, hey, Mario 3, it's coming, but here's some like screenshots from it. And that's what I was reading Nintendo Power for. And then secondarily, I was reading it to get tips about Nintendo games I was struggling to beat.
Oh yeah, tips are a thing. So I bought GamePro. I think I started subscribing to GamePro. The first issue I got, it had.
You came to the gaming magazine world way late.
Yeah,
I'm just realizing.
Yeah, had Mortal Kombat 2 on the cover, and it had inside a guide for doing combos in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, right? Or Super Street Fighter 2 in the arcade, right? So
GamePro's kind of where I went for reviews compared to Nintendo Power.
Well, so with GamePro, right? I was reading all the words. The letters column was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
The editors had all these personalities. The biggest, most famous editor was Scary Larry, who I'm pretty sure works at Nintendo Company or still works there. He definitely did work there. I think he still does. And then, there would be a section in the back that, had a few pages of like arcade stuff and foreign stuff, right? Like, oh my God, look at this machine, one arcade machine you'll never play.
Yeah.
Oh my God, right? There were some tips and things in there, but often they were not for games that I had, so they didn't help me that much.
Yeah.
I was mostly just actually looking at, news from the world of, video games, like what's happening.
GamePro was definitely more like news and reviews for me, as opposed to Nintendo Power, which was mostly tips and tricks.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I subscribed to GamePro, like even up until all the way through college. I think I stopped subscribing when we lived in Beacon at some point. And then I gave all the magazines to some teacher who used them for a craft project, I think.
I don't think I ever subscribed.
They're all on archive.org or online. You can.
I don't think we ever actually subscribed to GamePro. I just like read copies of it laying around, read them in Walden books, that kind of thing. And I'd occasionally
to it. I get every single for like years and years and years. I got every single one. It definitely went downhill over time as those editors all left and all those writers left. And it was literally just at some point, you just printing what big game companies wanted them to print, right? Ads, advertorials, right?
Yep.
That sort of
thing. But that even for me was still way later, because even before I was reading Nintendo Power, like around the same time, I was getting Dragon Magazine, but not subscription. That shit wasn't cheap either. I was buying random one-off issues of Dragon Magazine with like my allowance money at the local gaming store from like this giant cardboard box of just ones going back into the 70s.
Yeah, I didn't do that
because I
don't think I ever bought. Did you ever buy a Dragon or Dungeon magazine?
I probably bought easily 50 or 60 individual issues of Dragon Magazine before I was able to afford a subscription to Dragon Magazine. I subscribed to it for a long time.
When in the era where D&D was the only TTRPG for me, right? In those days, high school, college, earlier.
Oh yeah, you started way later than me.
But I was also in middle school. I played, but I was basically like a core book only person, right? I was like, remember in college, like you guys would always buy like, when 3rd edition was the thing, you guys were always buying like Sword and this.
Yep. Because those were necessary.
Nope. I was like, I do not buy any extra stuff. I buy my player's
But the thing is, Dragon Magazine was the magazine I read.
Dragon Magazine felt to me like extra stuff. Like,
except it wasn't but the funny thing is, that was basically Dungeon Magazine. Dragon Magazine was pretty much a lot of commentary, advice, news, ads, miniature nonsense. Like there was a lot. It even had video game reviews. But there was a lot going on in Dragon Magazine. But it wasn't just here's supplements for your game. It was mostly commentary and articles and stuff, just like long form essays.
I saw Dragon Magazine at the game store, but yeah, I don't think I ever really read it. I think there was a comic that was in it or something.
Yeah, there were multiple comics in it. Knights at the Dinner Table is the one a lot of people remember. Well,
that's its own thing now, right?
Yeah, but a few other.
Print, I think.
Oh, what was the name? There was one about a henchling. I forget what it was even called. There was a bunch of comics in it. It had a whole like comic section at the end, but it was so dense with content that I read Dragon Magazine religiously pretty much through all of elementary school and into middle school in the era before I had people to play D&D with. And then in middle school, when I finally had people to play with, when we were playing either Rules Cyclopedia D&D or like AD&D First Edition, by then I was playing actively and also using Dragon Magazine. And I subscribed to it well into RIT. Dragon Magazine was like a big part of my life until...
I don't remember a Dragon Magazine ever showing up at the apartment.
Yeah, they arrived. I kept getting them. I had them. There's a giant pile of them.
I never remember a single one.
Yeah, you never read it. You never seemed to care about it.
I didn't read it.
Dragon Magazine was pretty legit. The only complaint I really have about it, as like having escaped the orbit of Dungeons and Dragons, was that Dragon Magazine's essays were very typical of the D&D discourse that happens today, just on the internet, where people were writing big essays about how to fix problems that are only problems if you're an insufferable shithead.
I mean, that's the thing, is that this conversation doesn't end because people don't change, right? It's like you're still playing the same game, D&D, and you're still a shithead. So you're going to have the same problem and write the same solution over and over again. And you're not going to stop playing D&D or
every D&D conversation, the discourse
that is going to stop being a bad person.
That has happened about the rules seems to all be the same as the article I read in Dragon Magazine as a kid called Romancing the Stone Skin, which was about literally how to prevent your players in second ed D&D from abusing the Stone Skin spell. Because that was considered a significant problem, and I cannot describe to you how much discourse there was about that specific problem on was it AltFan D&D, whatever the AltNet board was for Dungeons and Dragons.
So the other big thing, I guess, is mostly middle school times, late middle school, was Magic the Gathering when CCGs became a thing.
Yep, there were only two magazines that talked about that: Scry and Inquest.
Yeah, there were no way to get news about those either, other than magazines. So there was Inquest magazine, Scry magazine, and I think another one that we didn't have. The internet says there was one called Duelist, but I never had that.
Everyone I knew would talk about Scry when I was in middle school, like big into Magic. So one day,
there was Scry and Inquest. At the time, I felt like they were both kind of equal.
And they were both honestly super shitty.
Yeah, they didn't really, they were mostly just ads for...
Scry was even worse. Scry was mostly the sheet of the current going rate of every Magic card.
Yep. Well, because there were so few at the time that you could put them all in a magazine.
Yep.
Right, for a complete price.
I would borrow my friend's copy of Scry to keep up to date on what my Magic cards were worth, so I could go sell the ones that were valuable to make money to buy more Magic cards. That was like a big part of my middle school life, was selling valuable Magic cards to get more total Magic cards.
These magazines did not have any helpful information in terms of strategy,
Scry was absolute garbage content other than that price list. Like
it was just ads, just buying into the
might as well have just been Lorem Ipsum text for all I gave a shit about Scry.
Yeah, but CCGs were such a big thing at the time, and there was no information source for them. So if you were into them, those and you weren't like part of a community because you were just a little kid.
Yep.
The magazine was like your key to knowing what the hell was going on. Like, knowing that there was a new set coming to the comic shop, right? It's like I didn't know. Otherwise, I would have showed up, seen Ice Age, and been like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
Thanks to the magazine, I knew what the hell it was.
Oh my God. The full title of Scry was technically Scry Collectible Card Game Checklist and Price Guide.
Yep.
That tells you everything you need to know about it. Though, fun fact, Dragon Magazine was how I learned about Magic the Gathering. Because remember...
Interesting.
So there was a D&D CCG that came out right after Magic where they tried to hop on that train like everyone did. It was terrible. It was so bad. But Dragon Magazine had an article about Magic the Gathering where an editor played it and reviewed it. And I was fascinated. But kid brain, I didn't realize they were talking about Magic, so I bought the D&D collectible card game, and it was so bad that I was offended. But I think it was two or three Dragon magazines later, all the articles were about how every D&D group got completely ruined because the players don't want to play D&D. They show up and then they want to play Magic.
It's a better game.
Yeah. But that was the discourse.
Learned about Magic because some kid I was friends with brought it over to my house and we played it. And then I saw the box, the little starter box, his revised starter box. And I was like, I've seen those at the store on the counter. Yeah. Now I know what the hell that is.
I started playing in the middle of Unlimited's run.
Anyway, so some last magazines here. There's a magazine that I've read a couple times. I haven't bought it, called Game Informer. And the thing that's notable about Game Informer is that it's owned by GameStop.
Yeah.
So even worse, I don't know if it still is, but it might still be if it still exists.
Yeah, GameStop is still the publisher.
Yeah, but even worse than Nintendo Power, right? There was official PlayStation magazine, things like that, which were effectively the same as Nintendo Power. But a magazine owned by the retailer felt to me as even worse than that, right? As
so apparently it's a weird scam. In 2017, the total circulation of Game Informer was 7.5 million, and it was the fifth most popular magazine in America.
It's huge, absolutely huge.
But it appears that almost all of that circulation was copies that were put into GameStops that no one ever read.
Also true. Also, I think like if you were like if you were a kid who was doing a lot of, if we were younger, we would have been those kids who were constantly buying and selling games back to GameStop.
That's why I don't begrudge those kids, because
if you did that and you got the GameStop card and stuff, you got Game Informer.
Yeah,
right?
by then I was already an internet citizen and I didn't need any of that crap anymore. But
yeah, and
I understand why kids are the way they are.
Numbers.
Yep.
So Game Informer was a thing. So there was also the PC gaming magazines, right? So the thing about the PC gaming magazines that set them apart was they could come with games. You couldn't do that for like it.
That the sole reason I subscribed to PC Gamer was to get that fucking disc and later that CD.
I didn't subscribe. I would just buy issues on the shelf if I saw that the CD was advertising games that I didn't already have demos of or shareware of. Because there's always shareware. They never give you full versions on that thing.
Oh, no. Thing is, as a kid, kind of didn't matter. I played the Doom shareware for a long time and was perfectly happy with it. I never had the real version of One Must Fall 2097 or Raptor Call of the Shadows.
But I wouldn't have had any version if it wasn't for a PC Gamer CD-ROM.
Yep. PC Gamer, which also had that racist Coconut Monkey caricature.
Coconut Monkey. So if you put that CD-ROM in your computer, it wasn't just a CD-ROM full of demos. There was sort of like this little application that was sort of like a front end.
I installed that shit every time I got an issue. That was an era when you could take a random disc sent to you by a magazine, and it honestly wouldn't fuck your computer up.
And they would put little Easter eggs in it, and it was cute and sometimes funny. But
nerds would like scrutinize the files on those discs and later those CDs to like try to figure stuff out about games.
But PC Gamer's mascot was this racist coconut monkey that would be like, "Hello, I am Coconut Monkey," right?
Yep.
And it's like, "Whoa, dude, whoa!" At the time, I thought it was just a cute monkey, but now it's like, "Whoa."
Yep, like Apu was offensive as a caricature, and Coconut Monkey
is way worse than Apu.
Coconut Monkey like leapt through warp speed beyond Apu into a terrifying realm that, as a white kid growing up in the Midwest, I just did not even like get it.
Yeah. There were some other PC gaming magazines besides PC Gamer, even though PC Gamer was the biggest one, and they also had CDs.
PC Gamer, I think, also felt like the most respected one.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other thing that set PC gaming magazines apart was that they would talk about hardware. GamePro would never talk about hardware. It was all about games, right? And Nintendo was only about Nintendo games. PC Gamer, you would see ads for like Voodoo Card.
Yep.
Right?
PC Gamer is how I learned about like glide drivers and like when video cards became a thing for real, what the deal was with video cards.
Yeah, I think that's why we mentioned it even a little bit in our tech magazine episode, because it was like partially a tech magazine, right? Because it was PCs and the games that you played on them together.
Yep, and pretty much for me, PC Gamer, like the content was great right up until I stopped reading it, and the sole reason I stopped subscribing to PC Gamer was the internet 100% replaced everything I was getting out of PC Gamer.
I can download demos now. Goodbye.
Yep. Also, hey, people are just reviewing games online. All right, cool.
Bye.
I don't even trust game reviews anymore.
Yeah, I don't read reviews.
Like I don't know if it's obvious, but we basically don't use game reviews at all. Like I only read
reviews of anything, right? It's like a lot of board game people are like out there, going to like there's all this board game media, like so and so,
I almost never read game reviews of any kind. I only play games and review them.
I do not consume reviews of pretty much media, period. Movie reviews, book reviews, nothing. I just don't. I don't need them. I know what I want. All I need to know is what it is and when the release date is.
I will sometimes read a review, mostly when I'm doing research for a panel or trying to get better at a game, but not to decide if I like the game or not or should buy it or not, for sure.
So just brief mentions, there was a magazine called EGM, Electronic Games.
Oh, yeah. Stay tuned, Scott. Stay tuned.
I don't know if it still exists.
It still exists. I found it.
Oh, okay. But is it still in
If anyone knows what the fuck I'm referencing, you are one of the original listeners of GeekNights. I'll just leave it at that.
I don't know if it's still in print, but it was like, to me, it was the most generic gaming magazine. Like it just covered all video games, reprinted press releases, just industry shill. Didn't have anything valid. But I also have this memory that probably would be confirmed if I would bother to Google it, that it had a long history, right? That like old, like it feels like that was an old magazine that had, you know, like a history of being really good and then just fell from grace over time. That's what I don't know if Electronic Gaming Monthly is related to Electronic Games, which is an old magazine. So there could be some confusion. I don't know. And then lastly, I want to give a brief mention to Games Magazine, which is not much of a magazine. It's mostly crossword puzzles and things like that.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's basically this magazine that comes out, and it has like a variety of, you know, little puzzles, crossword, word search, cryptograms, all that sort of stuff. But I think it's notable, in, you know, because you could just buy a collection of those puzzles. Why would you buy Games Magazine? There are two things I remember about Games Magazine. Granted, I haven't read one since the 90s, is that A, it would actually talk about like, you know, things happening in the sort of the puzzle game adjacent world with like a little bit. It did have some content in the front. And I think it might have even had a letters column. But B, it was sort of like this hotbed of, you know, like, here's a new kind of puzzle, right? And things like that, like puzzles you hadn't seen. There isn't some collection of like 1,000 of these puzzles in a book because they weren't sure yet if that kind of puzzle was going to be popular. So it's like before there was a book with like 1,000 Sudokus in it because Sudoku wasn't a big thing in the US, right? Games Magazine would have a Sudoku in it, you know?
Yep.
And then that's how they found out that Sudoku was a big deal. At least I think it is. I don't know.
So along those lines, kind of last and least, Dungeon Magazine, which I didn't really actually talk about. The deal with that one, I never subscribed to it because it was way expensive.
I just knew it existed. I never looked at it.
So it wasn't like the sister to Dragon Magazine in any real way. It was just, if Dragon Magazine was essays, articles, content, Dungeon Magazine was, here are 4 modules. Every issue was just, here are specific modules for D&D games. You can just run these as a game master. The idea was only game masters subscribed to it and read it, and players were encouraged not to read it because it had like the stories that your game master might just run for you. But the way I handled it,
less expensive than buying actual modules.
Yep. It was also a way just to find interesting modules. Like it was a wide range of content. But generally what I would do is buy old back issues from the dollar bin at that same game store.
A magazine like that, it's like there's no, the date
timeless.
doesn't matter.
In fact, the older ones are better because my players were very much less likely to have read a Dungeon Magazine from like 1979. I want to say, I don't think I actually had any issues of Dungeon Magazine from before like the late 80s.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it didn't even start until 86, so it was probably early 90s.
Yeah. So yeah, when it comes to gaming, especially, magazines were the key way to get news about it in the 80s, 90s, until the internet became a thing in the mid-2000s. And so being nerds of the time, we read a lot of them. Nowadays, they're useless. They don't have a reason to exist.
Yep. And the content that was really timeless from these things, mostly essays, has migrated online pretty effectively. There is a lot of...
Thankfully, scans of most of these magazines are on the internet. So.
Oh, yeah. But also just people are writing very insightful essays on game design and games, even just for free and putting them online. Like that content is just out there about
Twitter
current
threads.
games. Yeah, there are Twitter threads.
Subscribe to a magazine to get the equivalent of a current Twitter thread I get for free.
Yep. Now I can just follow Cole Worley on Twitter and he'll just throw insights at me randomly.
People on Board Game Geek just throw down whole like these design diaries. It's like, all right, thanks.
Yeah.
$0.